Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Thursday, October 9th, 2025. This is USA Today's The Excerpt. Today, Israel and Hamas agree on a peace deal, plus how an immigration crackdown has upended lives in Chicago. And we look at the case against former FBI Director James Comey. Israelis and Palestinians rejoiced earlier today after a ceasefire and hostage deal were announced. They're expected to sign an agreement in Egypt this afternoon. President Donald Trump said on Truth Social yesterday that it was a great day for the Arab and Muslim world, Israel, all surrounding nations, and the U.S. He also thanked mediators from Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey. The first phase of Trump's plan called for the release of Israeli hostages within 72 hours of an agreement being reached in exchange for Palestinians detained in Israel. He said in a phone interview with Fox News' Sean Hannity last night that he expected living and deceased hostages to be released on Monday. The peace plan also called for the immediate restoration of humanitarian aid in Gaza. You can stay with usatoday.com for all the latest throughout the day. Across Chicago, locals say Trump's immigration crackdown has upended lives, even as events like Cubs playoff games carry on as normal. And Trump said he would jail Governor J.B. Pritzker and Mayor Brandon Johnson for resisting his crime-fighting goals in the city. I spoke with USA Today breaking news reporter Michael Loria for the latest as he joined me from outside Wrigley Field. Thank you for joining me, Michael.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on.
So you're right here, Michael, that amid this immigration crackdown from President Donald Trump, life in and around Chicago has really been upended. How so? What have you seen or heard from residents there?
It's pretty surreal, as some of the people here have told me to watch. This is everything in terms of seeing armored cars rolling through neighborhoods to seeing Black Hawk helicopters being used for immigration raids. You know, it's the type of thing that folks here in Chicago have never seen before. I think probably the thing to highlight, however, is not just these sort of high profile instances, but what some of the folks have told me in terms of the fact that they're becoming afraid to leave their houses. They're afraid that they'll get picked up off the street and detained simply because they look like they're Hispanic.
Well, as for the Trump administration's approach, I mean, what do we hear from them? How do they defend, I guess, this strategy and all this?
From the very beginning, the Trump administration has said that this is about catching the worst of the worst immigrants who are criminals. The Department of Homeland Security told me that they had arrested some 1,500 people in connection with the Midway Blitz. That's the immigration enforcement crackdown in the Chicago area. Among them, they say, are folks who are convicted sex offenders and murderers. And some of them they've provided names for that we've been able to verify. However, for the vast majority of these, we have not been able to independently verify their criminal backgrounds or even their immigration status. Just real quick, I would like to highlight two of the folks that immigration agents were after. One of them was a Southside tamale vendor who, by all accounts, was just an honest businesswoman. Also, at the same time, there was a man who was fatally shot in the northwest suburbs, Silverio Villegas Gonzalez, who, according to Cook County criminal records, his only sort of background was traffic infractions. The man was shot and killed after dropping off a son at daycare.
Very disturbing stuff there, Michael. How are some residents pushing back in this moment? What have you heard in some of the reporting conversations you're having?
So one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of people in the city have begun setting up what they're calling rapid response teams. These are groups which are basically responding to reports of ICE sightings, of immigration agent sightings. And their job is to go and try and document as much of this as they can, with the hopes that eventually this will either inform public opinion or even be used in a court of law. This is happening, I would say, everywhere from the Wisconsin border down to Indiana. And it's pretty impressive to see. However, there's a lot of folks who are also feeling a bit intimidated about doing this type of work and are a bit shy about talking about it because they feel that they could get in trouble for doing it.
Well, that's interesting. You know, Trump has now deployed National Guard troops to the area, Michael. How is that move landing with communities in greater Chicago?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting you bring that up. I was up yesterday in the suburb of Waukegan, which is close to the Wisconsin border. And it's a suburb that, you know, has a pretty significant Latino population. And one of the things I was noticing walking around town is that, for example, a sports complex that has indoor soccer fields today, folks are feeling scared and afraid to go about life as normal because they're awaiting a judge's decision in downtown Chicago around whether federal troops can remain in the city or not.
All right, Michael Loria covers breaking news for USA Today, joining us from Chicago. Thank you, Michael.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me on.
Authorities have arrested a man accused of sparking the Palisades fire that devastated parts of Los Angeles at the start of the year. The blazes killed at least a dozen people and left thousands without homes. 29-year-old Jonathan Rinderknecht is accused of maliciously starting a fire in the early hours of January 1st. Though it was initially put out, it continued to burn underground until winds ignited it and turned it into the Palisades fire, according to authorities. Over 23,000 acres were eventually burned. According to the criminal complaint against him, he made several attempts to call 911 after lighting the fire just after midnight. Many attempts didn't go through, but officials said the man may not have had cell signal in the area. He was eventually able to reach emergency services, by which time a nearby resident had already reported it to 911. You can read more with a link in today's show notes. Former FBI Director James Comey entered a plea yesterday to charges that he lied to Congress more than 5 years ago. I spoke with USA Today domestic security correspondent Josh Meyer for more. Josh, thanks for joining me.
My pleasure, Taylor.
So, Josh, just for anyone who maybe has been in and out of the news cycle here in recent days or weeks, refresh us. What are the charges here, and then how did Comey plead yesterday?
James Comey, the former FBI director, pleaded not guilty to charges that he lied to Congress, and more specifically that he lied to Congress and obstructed a congressional proceeding in testimony that he gave more than 5 years ago about his investigation at the FBI into the 2016 election interference case, looking into whether Russia interfered with the election.
What can you tell us about Comey's defense attorney here, and what did we hear from him, I guess, specifically?
Yeah, so that was significant. I mean, Comey's defense attorney, you probably couldn't find a better or more road-tested, I guess, defense attorney than Patrick Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald was a very, very senior Justice Department lawyer. He's a good friend of Comey's, an old friend of Comey's. They rose up the ranks at the Justice Department together. He was the U.S. attorney in Chicago for more than a decade. He's handled some of the biggest terrorism and political corruption cases over the last generation, 20 years or so. And he is representing Comey as part of this all-star team. And he said to the judge, and it was quite moving, he said, "It will be the honor of my life to represent Mr. Comey against these charges."
Well, another name here on the other side, U.S. Attorney Lindsay Halligan. Josh, what can you tell us about her arguments, and I guess maybe some of the controversy around her?
Well, she has certainly not risen up through the ranks of the Justice Department like Jim Comey did or Patrick Fitzgerald. First of all, she was a beauty contest runner-up, and then she was a insurance lawyer. She has no prosecutorial experience. She was a personal defense lawyer for Trump, and she kind of fits the mold that Trump likes for sort of, women lawyers that represent him. She's telegenic, she wears fancy clothes, and she looks good, and she can talk in good sound bites on camera, but there's a lot of questions about whether she's got the legal chops to do a case like this, whether she's supervising it as the U.S. attorney or actually prosecuting the case herself.
Josh, this Comey indictment, I mean, how unusual is a move like this? Do we have any precedent that we can point to?
We've looked for precedents, and it just seems extraordinarily unusual. I mean, Trump, of course, called on Pam Bondi, the attorney general, to prosecute Comey, saying that he was, dirty and that he was guilty. And then 5 days later, after the line prosecutors and the even Trump-appointed U.S. attorney in Virginia would not prosecute Comey because they said there was not enough evidence to prosecute him, Trump fired that prosecutor, Eric Siebert, installed Lindsay Halligan there in his place, and then she brought the charges against him. But what's very noteworthy is in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Eastern District of Virginia, no other attorneys from that office signed the indictment papers. It's only Lindsay Halligan, Trump's political appointee. So they had to bring up two federal prosecutors from North Carolina to help her argue the motion and to handle the arraignment of Comey.
So I guess we have a trial scheduled for January, Josh. What's next? What can we expect between now and then?
Well, what Pat Fitzgerald said was that they're going to contest the charges and they're going to try to get the case thrown out for a number of reasons, one of which I wrote about this morning, which was that Halligan wasn't even properly appointed and that the Justice Department and the Trump administration lacked the legal authority to appoint her in this case. And it's a very convoluted argument, but basically you're only allowed to appoint one interim U.S. attorney, and after that doesn't lead to a formal permanent appointment, the courts are supposed to determine what happens next, not the president. So that's one case. Fitzgerald also argued that they're going to be fighting the case and likely, he says, trying to get it thrown out. Basically, they're singling Comey out for prosecution. He said it was a vindictive prosecution and a selective prosecution, both of which are grounds for throwing the case out. So we'll see what happens, but there's going to be oral arguments next month. And the judge has set a very tight timeline. He wants to see the case go to trial by January 5th.
All All right, helpful insight for us. As always, Josh Meyer covers domestic security for USA Today. Thank you, Josh.
My pleasure.
And later today, book bans aren't just about titles being pulled permanently. Even a short disappearance matters.
I spoke to PEN America's Freedom to Read director, and she told me that the key point here is access. So if a book was on the shelves at one point and no longer is there, even if it's only for weeks or months at a time, there is a restriction on that access.
That's USA Today Books reporter Claire Mulroy. She joins my colleague Dana Taylor to explain what advocates say is really at stake in the nationwide fight over banned books. Listen today beginning at 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on this feed. And thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your pods. And as always, you can email us at podcasts@usatoday.com. I'm Taylor Wilson. I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.